Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be talking about a massive winter storm that'll cause a ton of issues, from snow accumulation upwards of 2 feet to ice accumulation that could cause power outages along with significant travel impacts. I'll give you the latest breakdown on both of these situations and more in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today that will lead into this winter storm over the next few days. Beginning with the central United States, you may notice there's actually a couple of different areas that we're watching. One of those is actually back near the Pacific Ocean. That is one of our low pressure systems out of the two that we're monitoring. There's another one back up near the Rocky Mountains. This one is also going to play a part into this winter storm that we're going to see evolve over the next 48 hours over the central and as well as the northern plains, eventually translating to a massive blizzard and winter storm in the Midwest and even back through the Northeast and maybe the northern Ohio Valley. So this is going to be a massive winter storm that we're watching. In fact, the National Weather Service has already issued a ton of watches and warnings across the United States, and you can maybe see over here, almost everywhere over here is in some sort of colored box. A lot of these pink areas are your winter storm warnings, and as well as those red areas, those are your blizzard warnings. We have a few of them, one in Wyoming, one in Montana, and the one that we're really going to focus on is back over in South Dakota as well as Minnesota. Winter storm watches extend all the way back through New England, and as well as winter weather advisories go as far south as Nebraska and Iowa. And this is really for the concern for the potential for several feet of snow, along with the threat for ice accumulation, which will cause a ton of travel impacts. So for the rest of the day today, we'll actually begin to notice this winter storm a little bit today. It will accumulate a few inches of snow over the northern plains and the Midwest. Once we go into tomorrow morning, though, that is when things become much more organized and really ramp up across the Great Plains and back through the Midwest. So eventually by lunchtime tomorrow, we're going to be watching the northern plains for at least some snow. It will not be very significant at first. It looks to just be light to maybe moderate, but things will pick up throughout the afternoon and evening, and eventually going through Thursday morning, that snow will start to move out of the northern plains. I'll show you the snow accumulation in just a second. The Midwest is where things are very, very important to be watching for. There will be a threat for ice, snow accumulation, everything basically will be possible here, and there will be some significant impacts. So I'm going to kind of take you through what's going to be happening here over the next 48 hours. Beginning with this evening, we'll actually have some light to moderate snow ongoing in Wisconsin. Even as far east as Michigan, there will be a threat for some light to moderate snow. And then eventually going through tomorrow morning, that is when things will, maybe die down just a little bit, but it really starts to ramp up once we get closer to lunchtime. We're going to be watching for the threat of freezing rain, which will equivalent to some ice accumulation, and that could very well cause some very significant travel impacts, along with the threat for widespread power outages if there is enough ice accumulation, which I'll show you where those areas have that best chance in just a second. Once we go into the afternoon and even closer to the evening hours, that is when heavy snow will be ongoing, which could turn into some blizzard conditions in some areas in Minnesota, and maybe even western Wisconsin would not be out of the threat of that, and back through South Dakota. Once we go closer to the late evening and overnight hours, we'll still be watching for freezing rain, especially back over in central Michigan. That is where our threat for some very significant ice accumulation exists, and even into southern sections of Wisconsin, we'll be watching very closely for some ice accumulation overnight. And by Thursday morning, one more round of light to moderate snow will exist, with some patchy freezing rain existing. That would primarily be closer to central Wisconsin, back through areas actually as far north as northern Michigan. Now, before I show you the region-wide view of snowfall accumulation, I do want to show you a couple of states in particular that will see some very significant snowfall accumulation. Beginning with Minnesota, this region could actually see upwards of 1 to 2 feet of snow, and an isolated location or two could get above 2 feet. So for right now, this is the current estimates of what you can expect in terms of snowfall as we go through Thursday and Friday. And the most significant areas will be near the Twin Cities. The Twin Cities could actually get upwards of 2 feet of snow out of this event. Now, the main area of where we'll see that 2-foot range will likely be very, very little, meaning that there is some uncertainty of where that exactly will be, because this is the area right here where you see these tan colors. That would be representing 2 feet of snow. This could go a bit further to the north. It also could go a little bit further to the south. So keep that in the back of your head. That is an area that we have to watch for very closely for very significant impacts for sure. Back through Wisconsin, we'll also be watching for the threat of 1 to 2 feet of snow. Green Bay, Ironwood, even back through areas in western Wisconsin, those areas could could very well get upwards of 1 to 2 feet of snowfall out of this event. I would expect some very significant accumulation there. But look down near Milwaukee. Basically nothing for Milwaukee out of this event. I know it's going to be a very crazy dividing line. You only have to travel 20 to 35 miles north to be able to see a difference between no snow to maybe up to a foot of snow. It is going to be a very sharp divide. Region-wide, this is the snowfall accumulation, so areas in northern Michigan as well, you'll be talking probably at least around 8 to 12 inches. A few areas might get above that, and as well as eastern South Dakota could see some very significant ice or snowfall accumulation, excuse me, as well. Ice accumulation, this is going to be a very significant thing to watch, because this could lead to some power outages, in some cases numerous, along with the threat for some very significant travel impacts. We'll be watching southern sections of Wisconsin and northeastern parts of Iowa for some very significant ice accumulation. Back through Michigan as well, there will be a chance for some ice accumulation there. Now, the big thing is, if we're over a half an inch of ice accumulation, that is when power outages get very widespread. I do not see any areas in particular that will definitely see that amount, but some areas that could would be in here in southern Wisconsin and eastern and northeastern Iowa, and as well as maybe a couple of patchy areas in central Michigan. Those are the two areas to watch for some very significant ice accumulation. Now, in terms of wind gusts, this will be a big deal because we'll be watching for some blizzard-like conditions. That'll be most noticeable across Minnesota as well as Wisconsin, where wind gusts could get upwards of 30 to 45 miles per hour. This could lead to some blizzard-like conditions, even going through Thursday morning. Wind gusts around 25 to 35 miles per hour. That will create drifting and as well as blowing snow. In terms of travel impacts, the main areas to watch will be in the Twin Cities area. That is where we could see some very significant travel impacts. There's actually already an extreme travel impact area outlined there in the Twin Cities, and as well as western parts of Wisconsin. This is an area that you should not be traveling in. Major travel impacts in the red, as well as moderate in the orange, and yellow is your minor travel impacts for the next few days. Now, for the Northeast, we'll also be watching for the threat of this winter storm. It will really ramp up Wednesday afternoon and evening. Freezing rain possible in northern Pennsylvania back through New York. Once we go into the evening and overnight hours going into Thursday, we'll be watching for the threat of some very heavy snow, primarily in northern New England, with some freezing rain, which could lead to some ice accumulation across parts of the Northeast. In terms of snowfall accumulation out of this event, the main area of snow for those that really want snow in New England, it seems for right now the most significant of it will be in northern parts of New England. There will be a chance for this to shift a bit further down to the south. By the way, I do think this computer model is leading it a little bit further to the north than where I would put it, but at this point, definitely be mindful. There's definitely a chance for some snow accumulation as well back down in maybe Massachusetts. Now, in terms of ice accumulation in the Northeast, it will not be as bad as the Midwest. However, that does not mean that things will still not be that bad, because untreated roads will still be impacted, especially by this ice accumulation that we're watching for. Now, in terms of how much ice we'll see, it will not be nearly as accumulative as areas like Michigan. You can notice back over in eastern Michigan, the chance for up to a half an inch of ice does exist. But back over here into the Northeast, we're really watching a much larger area, but it's not going to be nearly as accumulative. So we'll be talking anywhere from a glaze of ice, maybe up to somewhere near a tenth of an inch of ice. A few areas in western New York may reach closer to a quarter of an inch of ice. So keep that in mind for those back over in those areas. That could very well be more significant ice accumulation, which may lead to a couple of isolated or even scattered power outages. Now, real quick, I did mention in the last few forecasts, I'll go over the severe weather. There is actually now a slight risk of severe weather from western Illinois. I know that's kind of crazy, all the way back through Oklahoma. This will be for the threat of damaging winds primarily, with an isolated tornado threat. It really begins all tomorrow morning. A few storms will be severe in Oklahoma. This will be mainly for damaging winds. Again, an isolated tornado or quarter-sized hailstone is not out of the question. Once we go into the afternoon hours on Wednesday, that storm activity will actually move into Illinois as well as back through Indiana. Those areas may see a little bit of severe weather. The cutoff line, though, for severe weather will likely be in western parts of Indiana. Before this forecast ends, I do want to mention that the temperatures on Thursday will be record-setting for a large part of the country. Back up into the northern plains, there is a potential for 58 locations to see record low maximums. That is going to be unbelievable, with some areas not even getting above 0 degrees. Back down into the southeast and even into areas like the Ohio Valley, it's a completely different story. There will be around 79 locations challenging or surpassing record high temperatures. So this will be an area that we'll have to watch for very closely as well for record highs. Going into Friday morning, it will be frigid. These are your low temperatures. Some areas 20 degrees below zero. And for the wind chills Friday morning, brr, that is literally all I have to say. It is going to be as low as 50 degrees below zero for wind chills in the northern plains. Thanks for watching. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.